Telling, not yelling, toward more inclusive public engagement. Good morning again, thank you all for joining us. Today's session is about doing more inclusive and more intentional public engagement during a more and more polarized and divisive time. Just as our profession is adopting more robust approaches to addressing climate change, the legacy of racism, sprawl, the affordable housing crisis, the sense is that the public's voice is becoming increasingly difficult, unpleasant, and in fact intent on sinking rather than helping to build our planes. Hence yelling in the title. Today, myself and my colleagues will share why we believe that storytelling is a key to unlocking inclusive public engagement. We've designed today's session to respond to our learning goals. So I'll speak for a little while longer on the planning landscape and the engagement landscape. Then I'll turn things over to my colleague Asa, who will discuss the art and science of storytelling and story gathering, and how this approach can congeal, connect, and communicate community goals. Following, Kate Angie will speak about the importance of equity in storytelling, and how storytelling can be plugged into transit-oriented development, TOD. We might not have too much time for Q&A, but we'll be happy to meet everyone upstairs in the hub following our presentation. I am today's moderator. My name is Cole Mawo, and we are all from Renaissance Planning Group. So to help set the tone for the presentation, please raise your hand if you work in a community that is dealing with a polarizing issue. Okay. Just about everybody. Okay, and then somebody got 2 hands up. Okay. So most of you. Well, public engagement has always been contentious. And let's face it, disagreements are bound to happen. Planning is about shaping the future. But today our practice is being, I think it's fair to say, is increasingly susceptible to hijack and takeover by hostile seeming members of the public. There's lots of reasons for this. I just want to pinpoint one, which is social media. Social media platforms give a voice to many, including my dog, Strudel, who has a very popular following on Instagram. But unfortunately, it also amplifies the most upset and loud voices in the room. In the engagement process, this is a precursor for transforming disagreement into division. Meanwhile, many people are left out because traditional public engagement techniques totally fail to reach them. So today we'll talk about what can storytelling mean here. I'm really lucky to serve on the APA Board of Directors, and the association is already starting to create tools that respond to these issues. It's being covered in the Trend Report for Planners, which is a free resource for everybody. Recent Planning Advisory Service reports. The keynote session for NPC this year was all about storytelling. And we see in APA's new marketing, It Takes a Planner, is in fact a storytelling approach itself. But today, during this session, we'll present 2 case studies that very clearly relate to the storytelling practice to public engagement. To start telling stories, I could not be more proud to hand things over to Asa Eslocker, Storytelling Practice Lead and Director of Strategic Design and Communications at Renaissance Planning.
Thanks, Cole. Now, what if I told you a story? A story about how storytelling reminds us that there's far more that connects us than separates us. This is also a story behind the story. And a story about the worst public workshop of my career. Well, almost the worst. This is a case study about how we were walking into a public workshop in Central Florida that was certainly set up as potentially the worst of my career. And how many people here have worked in the wild, wonderful state of Florida? Yeah, and we've lived to tell, right? So this is the story that we call the Wauchula 180, named after this lovely small town. or the story of Bad Attitude John in the battle over 6 lanes. So why the bad attitude? I'll tell this story in a minute. First, like Cole said, my name is Asa, and it's such a pleasure to be here to talk about one of my favorite things, storytelling towards more inclusive engagement. And today I want to share how well-crafted stories harness emotions and how emotions drive decision-making. And how storytelling it can actually be a method for helping diverse communities move past polarized divides and move toward mutually beneficial outcomes. So I hope this will be fun. It'll be fun and serious. This is important work for us, right? We grapple with serious questions like these for nearly every project and every engagement scenario. So how can well-crafted, authentic storytelling benefit the communities we serve? How can storytelling address equity and bridge polarized communities? And why should we, the planning community and profession, care? So first, I came into planning after my master's in landscape architecture and urban design, which came after an 8-year career at ABC News in New York City. And this is where I learned storytelling as an investigative news producer. And for my 8 years at ABC News, there are many stories to tell, including being beat up on camera in West Virginia coal country. And yes, I'm proud this one won a nice award. And stories about buying unregistered guns with hidden cameras on the Texas border and being tear gassed at major political convention. But these stories led me to see many cities and places, which led to landscape architecture, urban design, and now planning. And now to today's session, our current application of storytelling towards more inclusive engagement, specifically in polarized communities. Oh, okay, how'd that get there? So this is Wauchula, Florida. I don't think so. This is actually the Butter Battle book, a classic Dr. Seuss story about unnecessary polarization within and around the built environment. This is actually Wauchula, Florida, a beautiful rural town in central Florida with wonderful people, where we were hired to lead a transportation study in community engagement in 2021. And like other rural communities, Wauchula is struggling with stagnant growth, high vacancy rates in the downtown, and population challenges. And we soon learned that Wauchula was also struggling with polarization around a 6-lane highway that cuts through the center of downtown. So some are saying, why a 6-lane highway through our downtown? And others are saying, well, more highway brings economic development. I think many of us have seen similar divides. So at the heart of the story, the anti-hero is Highway US 17. It's a 4-lane highway that actually expands into a 6-lane highway only inside the city limits. It completely bisects the community in 2 places, dominating the physical built environment. And while many here believe that 6 lanes will help with economic development by inviting more businesses, many others feel, of course, that US 17 is not safe and hinders the walkability necessary for a thriving downtown. So our story begins in 2021, the Florida Department of Transportation. By the way, anyone from the Florida Department of Transportation here? Okay, all right, that could be good, could be bad. They scheduled a resurfacing and potential redesign for US 17. But before the work begins, they hired us to lead the study and the community engagement, to hear from the community about their goals and vision for potential design elements. Perhaps improve multimodal access, safety improvements, biker ped improvements, speed management, or placemaking goals within the right-of-way that are aligned with the community's goals. And this is actually really thoughtful and proactive, that they're fully aware of the legacy of urban renewal, and they want to make sure the community can speak into this process. And this is a resurfacing project, right? So, just zooming out for a second, let's look at the process here. This is what we call the story gathering phase. This is the listening, interview, and data gathering phase. It's just as important as the storytelling, right? So for a community vision video, like Wauchula's, it begins here. First, I try to plan for and interview as diverse array of people as possible, and ideally on location. So the story gathering is grounded in place, so it's place-based, and with diverse human-centered stories, all woven into the final video. We try to build into the project budget and scope for storytelling as early as possible. But that's often a challenge because many agencies or communities don't include storytelling in the original scope, often because they don't quite know the power of good storytelling. So these community vision videos or stories, they highlight different voices and ideas. They unify people around common goals and even similar visions. And they often create an alignment of goals, even if the two sides don't typically see those alignments. Our journalistic method, it's not scripted. I ask a wide range of questions around many topics. So along with diverse first-person interviews, we do community tours, shadowing, ride-alongs, while also practicing the golden rule, just like I tell my kids, especially when entering new spaces or neighborhoods or someone's car or someone's truck. So obviously respect, manners, bestowing dignity should go without saying. And from these interviews, we create full transcriptions that become a rich trove of human-centered data that goes hand in hand with our robust hard data and technical findings. And the gear, I can geek out on the gear, and I love talking about the gear, so if anybody wants to talk about it after this session, I brought some of our kit. But it's lightweight, it's cost effective, it's kind of mid-level, and it's very doable for the first time firm or agency. All right, so now back in Wauchula. A few months before the August workshop, I arrived to begin the story gathering for this project. I met and interviewed all these nice folks, but during this time, something else was happening. Polarization was emerging. So false information was spreading about the project, and public mistrust nearly spiraled out of control. And little did we know that supporters of keeping all 6 lanes were fired up about a rumor of supposed lane repurposing, going from 6 lanes to 4, which of course was an option, but nobody was forcing this on anybody. So people in the community told us that it felt like that would be a step backward for their economic growth, and this idea the government is here to take away something is obviously a very powerful and scary narrative, even though it wasn't true. So mistrust swirled in the community, and many grew entrenched in their own assumptions that the government was somehow going to take their lanes. And I even had a newspaper reporter kind of lurking and following me from afar. But then, August 3rd, 2021, a humid, warm, late afternoon, we set up and prepared for the Wauchula Community Workshop. Arriving 15 minutes early was Mr. Bad Attitude himself, Big John. A former college football player with impeccable snakeskin boots. Look, I somehow caught that. Wearing a high-end blazer and nice watch. Big John came early to give us a piece of his mind, and he was ready for a fight. So, for a few tense moments before the workshop began, Big John sat down with our principal, Frank Kalpakis, who fielded his questions. Big John didn't shy away from laying out his thoughts about the misnomer of narrowing down US 17 to one road, or in his mind, how many feared that FDOT was going to arbitrarily stick a one-lane road down our throat. And many others arrived with the same assumptions. Then at 5 o'clock, the workshop began. And after a brief introduction, our team kicked off the 3-hour workshop with the 10-minute version of the Wauchula community video. For today, I have a cut-down version. It's a little more than 3.5 minutes. But first, I'm not going to make you close your eyes, but imagine yourself as a community member in that room. Try to imagine the tension and all the different viewpoints, not just Big John's. But here's the video.
Welcome to Wauchula in Hardy County, and enjoy your visit.
I love Wauchula. It's my home. My family is here.
Well, here's Wauchula. We love it here.
This community is my family.
Let me get you a little combo plate. Sliced brisket, and then about a 1/4 pound of pulled pork.
I can just picture like the sewing machines lined up. We are so excited to be on Main Street.
My wife and I chose to come back here. We raised our family here. Wauchula in Hardy County is my home.
So our downtown is beautiful. We have a lot of local owned businesses that have been around the area forever, a lot of old buildings.
US 17 is the economic lifeblood of this community.
You've got some of these trucks coming through at 50 miles an hour. The buildings are really tied up to 17, so it's not the most walkable area. It's loud, it's scary. You don't want to trip over the curb.
It feels sound like a freight train goes by sometimes. My daughter goes to gymnastics, just 2 blocks from my office. I don't feel like it's safe. I don't feel like traffic is slow enough. I feel like people are flying to beat the red lights.
So we've been working now for about 15 years to develop a more diversified manufacturing economy. When our riveter came about, I felt like it was an opportunity made in heaven for us, because they have a very large following of people that just love their product.
It's 4th of July weekend. We're celebrating in a big way here at QVC. It's also our Riveter Today Special Value Day.
We are on Main Street at the corner of Main Street and 17. So we're super excited to become a part of downtown. We manufacture handbags that provide mobile flexible income for military spouses across the country. Traffic flow and parking will be an important aspect for us, and making sure the logistics of people getting across the street.
We certainly would love any type of aesthetic enhancement that can happen. We have this conflict of aesthetics and functionality, but I'm concerned about decreasing functionality.
I mean, yeah, I get traffic needs to flow, but we still want to be able to accomplish a walkable downtown at the same time.
The vision for the downtown in 10 or 20 years would be for it to be a destination. I hope that there's that community engagement and feedback that FDOT really needs. We want this project, whatever it ends up ultimately being, to be the right fit for our community.
Well, nothing remains the same. There's change that's constantly going on. So we have to be aware of those changes and try to keep Wauchula on the cutting edge of adapting.
So I got 2 little boys, and I think about when I leave here, or I stop being mayor, I just want to make sure that whatever I do, whatever we do as a commission, that we've left it in a better place.
And we want it to be a place that kids want to come back to after they graduate high school. So creating that environment that they're proud of is really key.
Appreciate your business. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
So after the community story video, the atmosphere in the room changed. And actually, what I'm going to show you later is that their brain chemistry also likely changed. They went in the next 2-hour workshop ready to listen, ready to engage and collaborate, ready to work with people who had different viewpoints. And by the end, community members and FDOT staff expressed their appreciation for the surprisingly smooth and successful workshop and video. We had pulled off a complete 180 in Wauchula that day. So obviously that's why we call it the Wauchula 180. And as for bad attitude John, well, those were his own words at the end of the workshop. Big John humbly asked to address the whole group, and this is what he said.
Now, I came with a bad attitude because I earned a bad attitude. So I had a bad attitude coming here. I didn't want them coming in here and narrowing down to one road. And I am convinced that these people are not going to come in here and arbitrarily stick a 1-lane road down our throat. And I am extremely pleased, and I'm glad I came, and I appreciate what you are doing. Thank you. Thanks for coming down.
That's very kind of you. But that is the power of good storytelling. It has the power to change bad attitudes and change deeply entrenched or polarized beliefs. And of course, it's not a cure-all, right? But when done well, storytelling has a wide range of benefits for inclusive and equitable outcomes. Now I get to share a little more about the structure of storytelling and share some fascinating neuroscience that sheds light on what made this Wauchula 180 possible. So first, a brief overview. What is narrative? What is storytelling? Narrative is both the story, what is told, and the means of telling, so the product and the process, right? Like a first-person account, a film, a book, or a community video like this. And narratives are the oldest and primary ways that humans make sense of the world. I think this is fascinating, that as our brains evolved and languages developed, somewhere starting around 100,000 years ago, so did storytelling. So our brains and storytelling evolved together. What is storytelling? It's a vivid description of ideas, beliefs, personal experiences, and life lessons through stories or narratives that evoke powerful emotions and insights. Often it has a beginning, middle, and end. Obviously, I know some of us know this, or the classic 5 W's plus H, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. We always try to address those questions and answer those questions in the videos. Okay, why should we care, Asa, right? Show me the money. Where's the money for this, right? Why should we care? Again, because we care because stories harness emotions, and emotions drive decision making. Let me show you some of the research. So first, the compelling and widely cited elephant rider analogy illustrates how everyone has two sides of ourself, right? The elephant and the rider. These represent the two sides of human nature. The rider is logical, rational decision maker. But the elephant is the most powerful part of self. It's our emotions, our deeply held beliefs, our stubborn opinions, it's our good behaviors or bad behaviors, right? These are like a stubborn elephant that needs the right kind of motivation to change directions or change entrenched behaviors or beliefs, so in order to move forward. And stories can harness this powerful side of human nature. Storytelling can also harness the hormones and neural activity in our brain, right? So there's the cute kid and Renee from Jerry Maguire, of course, and so even if you haven't seen the movie, your brain is asking, wait a second, why are they up there, right? So storytelling, by definition, is dopamine creating. And we recognize certain narrative elements implicitly or explicitly. Subconsciously, our brain is always trying to figure this out. We are hoping, we are expecting, and we're waiting for something in a well-told story. And it's often the ups and downs, the buildup, the tension, the conflict, the release, the resolution. Our brains love this roller coaster. We love this kind of storytelling structure because it makes sense in our brain. And if it's not there, often we zone out, or we don't pay attention, or we're less attuned. And these are two examples, the man in the hole structure, which I'll get to in a minute, and then the classic Freytag's pyramid. It's like Shakespeare's 5 acts, which I think a lot of us know. But there's also, there's many storytelling structures, and man in the hole is the one I'm going to dive into here. It's similar to Freytag's pyramid, but it's just upside down. But both of these are super simple and they're relevant for today. So Kurt Vonnegut, the author said, nobody ever lost money telling the story of a man in the hole. And it's got 5 parts, and I'll go through these. Number 1, it's a comfort zone. That's the existing conditions, the character developments, the 5 W's plus H. And in our story, this was the setup. I love Wauchula. Wauchula's my home. There's some nice warm music and a guy offering us some brisket, right? But then there's always a trigger. And it's not a woman in the hole, it's a man in the hole, and he trips here, right? So for our story, it's the anti-hero is present, right? US 17 and the project triggers potential new ideas and fear of change, right? So now, crisis number 3. The character is down in the hole, or the story's in the hole, right? This is where discovery and transformation and some sort of a turning point happens. In our story, there was this crisis where Bill said, we have this conflict here, but then this also begins the transformation and getting unstuck. And then the recovery, right? So the recovery, that we have to harness the transformation or discovery to help climb back. And the city and FDOT, they need to come together. They need partnership. And then of course, a better place, right? You're wiser, more mature, the audience cares and feels differently now. So why care? For our future, for our families, our legacy. The mayor said, I've got 2 boys. I have 2 boys too, and that always gets me, right? So our common purpose and our goals, right? So a quick shout out, a resource. I love these pip decks. I'm not sure if you know them, but these are storytelling tactics, and they're literally like card decks. They're great for design thinking and brainstorming. We've got a whole different series of these. So I have to give a shout out because I use these a lot when trying to figure out storytelling or or even they've got workshop tactics. So just a great resource that I wanted to share. And I'm also really interested in the fascinating neuroscience too. A well-told story lights up your whole brain. So there's a whole growing body of brain science that's shown how storytelling produces a strong emotional and neurological response from multiple regions in our brain. It helps us remember the details, attend to information, and see different perspectives, and build empathy for the characters. And so, even different characters. And this is when your whole brain lights up. It's a mix of neurochemistry and hormones that some call the angel's cocktail. So, oxytocin, the bonding hormone, it's released. When it's released, we feel good. There's a feeling of connected to the characters, and the results for the listener are, is that caring is increased, empathy and trust, and you feel more human. And then endorphins. Endorphins are often released from laughter, so think, maybe the comic relief. They're also from happy moments. They're released from food, exercise, sex, and the results in the listener is that it relieves pain and stress. You feel more relaxed and actually more creative and focused. And cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, of course, but that's released from tension or the crisis moment, right? Distress or conflict, like what's gonna happen at this moment? And it actually results in the listener increased focus, attention, and memory. And so I think that's fascinating, and that's part of this roller coaster. And then, of course, dopamine. Dopamine is known as the motivation hormone, and it's released from the recovery or the resolving of the conflict, the climax resolution, and of course the happy ending. And so in the listener, it results in a high, in pleasure, hope, and more accurate recall and increased focus. So I think this is interesting, and all of these hormones combined, you can see the theme here. And those neurochemicals and hormones enhance the neural activity from good storytelling. Some call this neural coupling, where the brain mirrors and it lights up exactly like the storyteller. So with a good story, your brains are matching, and it builds trust, empathy, understanding, and connection. And there's brainwave synchronization between the listener and the storyteller. And then I love transportation theory. This is vicarious immersion in the world of a story. The listener resonates emotionally and responds with empathy. And new neural connections and neural pathways are actually created when we're transported. So now, think back to Big John. Perhaps he was transported while watching the video. And perhaps you all were transported to that warm, tense Wauchula workshop while I was telling the story. So again, why care?
Let me tell you what I wish I'd known when I was young and dreamed of glory. You have no control. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?
So we all care about who lives, who dies, and eventually who will tell our story, right? From our personal experiences to the neuroscience, I think it's all incredibly compelling. Storytelling persuades and inspires because of emotional learning and emotional investment. Stories actually change your brain chemistry. Storytelling shifts core beliefs, and it decenters power and privilege. It supports equity and inclusion by leveling the playing field and forming new neural pathways. And storytelling, I think, is a vital part of inclusive engagement, and it's often left out of scope. So most agencies, clients, or communities don't realize that they need it until they see it or experience it, right? And then storytelling is fun, and it's uplifting to the communities we serve. And it reminds us that there is far more that connects us than separates us. Now I hand it over to my colleague, Kate.
Thank you, Asa. That is a very hard act to follow. He is our expert storyteller. I'm just a planner, that's what I'm going to say right now. But I did want to kind of zoom back out for a moment because I have been a planner for 2 decades now, and I specialize a lot in public engagement. And one of the things that I feel very challenged with right now is that we are living in an age of what we call high conflict. If you haven't read this book, it's a fairly recent book by Amanda Ripley, and it really speaks to kind of the paralysis that exists when we are in this high conflict state. Because when we have high conflict as opposed to healthy conflict, we can no longer hear the people next to us that disagree with us. And that's where we are. She opens her book with this quote, "Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field and I'll meet you there." Because so long as I say you're wrong and I'm right, I'm not engaged, I can't collaborate, I can't problem solve. So one of the things I think we as planners are really challenged with, and why kind of storytelling is going to be one of those essential tools in our toolbox, is because we're in this state of high conflict. So we're here in this space. Our charge as planners is to move forward with issues like equity and social justice, and the very construct that we are being asked to kind of advance is questioned in our country. I live in Arlington, Virginia. We just adopted our first missing middle ordinance, and it brought out a lot of yelling. We know that talking about systemic racism through zoning policies, there's a lot of people in this country who can't even hear that language without it becoming this visceral reaction of, I can't handle that and it's wrong. So this is the context that we as planners now have to work within. And it's not easy. And I can't tell you that we have the answers for how we get out of this high conflict era, because it's not gonna happen overnight. But what I do know is that doing things like what you saw Asa do with a video and being really intentional about trying to get stories told and elevating a lot of different voices, what storytelling does for us is it humanizes us. It brings the people in the community on a level playing field. And that's really where we see, I think, a lot of opportunity. Our code of ethics as planners actually requires us, we have aspirations around things like equity and social justice. So we can't ignore that, and we have to enter this field of planning in this era of high conflict with these goals in mind. And so every time we engage with the public, I think we also have to check ourselves and make sure, are we going into the room assuming we're right and somebody else is wrong? And if that's how you're walking in the room, you already know you're not listening. So our job in the engagement space and in equitable engagement is to make sure that we are listening, and then we create a space for the people in the room to also have open ears and be able to hear. So there's a lot of really good material at this conference and other places on how to do good equitable engagement. I'm not going to talk about that, but what's interesting in everything you read about good public engagement, it also always tells you prepare for conflict. What can you do to make sure that you're ready for the conflict? And that's, I think, a lot what the storytelling toolkit is about too. But again, what storytelling is helping us to do is to attempt to find some common ground, get community voices on record, quite honestly, those first-person testimonies that really starts to put a narrative together that shows and can show the diversity of your community and create a relatable narrative. And I believe that all of this helps us to maybe create spaces for healthy conflict, because mostly our policies that we're trying to move forward right now, whether it is missing middle housing, or you're trying to get rid of exclusionary zoning, or you're trying to, God forbid, create a 15-minute city, which is now under attack. And this is the space that we're having to work in. So anything that we can do to move from that kind of high conflict to healthy conflict is going to be necessary, because we know that our policy change is in and of itself creating some need for dialogue about different viewpoints and different policy options. So I'm going to jump real quick to a project we're working on in Jacksonville, Florida, where we are attempting to prevent the yelling, and more importantly, we're trying to help tell the story for this community, within this community, with an equity lens. Because this is a corridor, this is the Green Line corridor of Northwest Jacksonville, and this is really the story of a corridor that's been left behind. Jacksonville, it's the northwest corner of Florida, and it's growing like gangbusters. All this heat map is showing you is where all the growth is going. And if you can kind of see, there's that little green line that's going like this in the upper left corner. None of the growth is going there. And it's not going there because it's a predominantly black community. It's been underinvested in for years, and it's allowing for the region to sprawl while missing tremendous opportunity, because there's already a transit investment to reinvest in this corridor, which is predominantly filled with people of color and lower incomes. So our charge, just walking in the room, and we've partnered on this project, I think I've got some of my colleagues here from SB Freeman, Development Advisors, to just tell the story of the corridor and the basics. You know, we as planners get all excited about the new metrics we can share, but sometimes people just don't know, oh wait, who lives there? What's the story? You know, what's the who? So we had to actually tell this story of who was living in the corridor and how it, you know, was very different than the rest of the city. We talked about the household, you know, income prices and how, in fact, we're already seeing tremendous gentrification happening, price escalation, high renter households, those sorts of things. We also had to point out with pictures and visuals that there's you know, all of the affordable housing, subsidized housing, is actually concentrated in this corridor. And some of the stuff as planners seems very basic, but when you have to start crafting a story that is oriented around equity issues and trying to get maybe leadership to take a different view and enact change, sometimes the basics work very well. So we did our traditional approach. We actually partnered with a wonderful local firm, Cantrice Jones. She's local, you're gonna see her in the video. She was our lead. I'm a white woman of upper middle class that doesn't live in Jacksonville. I cannot walk into this neighborhood and have much credibility from the get-go, so I need partners. And so that's what we found. We found somebody that is very engaged in the community, has existing relationships, and could help us walk into the room and be heard, quite honestly. That's a critical thing to do. So we did our engagement. We started to collect the first person stories. Asa was with me. We did a lot of interviews. We got a lot of people on camera, and we put together our own version of a Wauchula video, which I'm gonna play for you for a moment.
I love Jacksonville. I really, really love it.
There's been a lot of people moving back, which is really a feel-good movement.
When I think of the north side or the northwest side, I just think of strength and determination.
I think this is the diamond in the rough. I think we can make it a wonderful place.
My former pastor used to say, brighten the corner where you are. Brighten the corner where you are. There's always hope.
And the Jacksonville Transportation Authority has hired us to help assist with identifying ways to improve the corridor with development. So TOD, which stands for Transit-Oriented Development, that's an important part of understanding why we're here.
And I think the transit-oriented development is going to be a step in the right direction for making that change.
We too are Jacksonville. It's just a great place, and let's make it the best we can be.
So for us, the power of this video was not so much in stopping the yelling, but actually just to shine a spotlight in a place that hasn't really gotten any attention. And so where we are in the project right now is we're working for the Jacksonville Transportation Authority and getting them to kind of highlight this corridor in this sort of way is something new for them as a transit agency, as a transportation authority, but it's also brought some other potential partners in the room. This video allowed us to put together a convening and actually get the housing authority in the room on the same day in the same place to start talking with the transit experts. We've got local developers that came to that same meeting, and you know, there's development activity happening in the downtown, but they themselves didn't really know much about the rest of the corridor. So the story that we were able to just very quickly kind of put together and create I'm gonna call it more of a vision story and an aspirational story, here's something that needs to happen, here's something that could happen, is actually sparking action. And I think that's another, I guess, precursor to not creating the yelling, is to build kind of a story around hope and aspiration. So again, our kind of techniques here is that the video and the presentation that we then were able to give to leadership gave them some political, I guess, fuel, if you will, because we had those first voices in it. All the folks that we interviewed, we've been able to keep engaged, and we're hoping are going to be able to be interviewed at the end of this project and actually see some action and activities happen. So We believe a lot in storytelling, not just to stop the yelling, but actually to help with equity issues by getting first voices on camera and putting those first voices in rooms that maybe they otherwise wouldn't get there. So it helps humanize things, and getting us out of that high conflict zone into a more open ear listening space is another really powerful tool with storytelling. So with that, I think we can actually, we've got a few minutes for Q&A. All right, so I'll turn it over to you all. So, take it away.